I am Ashley Richardson. I just buried my father, Daniel Richardson. He was 63 years old, and we said goodbye to him today at Chapel Hill Memorial on the east side of town. At the funeral, as people were filing out toward the parking lot, a man in a charcoal suit grabbed my arm. He didn't introduce himself at first. He just pulled me close and whispered, "Don't sign anything Helen gives you. Your father left something for you in the chapel, room 7, behind the altar. You have 20 minutes before she locks it down forever." He pressed a small brass key into my palm and walked away, leaving me standing there with my pulse racing. I didn't know what to believe, but something in his urgency made me trust him. I waited until Helen was distracted by the funeral director. Then I slipped back inside the empty chapel. The air was thick with incense and silence. I found room 7 tucked behind the altar, a storage closet I'd never noticed before. The key fit perfectly. Inside, pushed against the back wall behind folding chairs and dusty hymnals, was a small safe. And taped to the top was a note in my father's handwriting. "Ashley, your childhood address." "I'm sorry I waited so long." I froze. My hands were shaking as I entered the numbers. The safe clicked open. Inside was a USB drive, a handwritten will dated 3 weeks before his death, and a letter that started with words I wasn't ready to read. I heard footsteps in the chapel. Helen's voice calling my name. I grabbed everything, shoved it into my purse, and closed the safe just as the door opened. You ever had that moment when you realize someone in your family has been lying to you all along? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. If you've ever questioned what really happened after someone died, hit like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what I found on that USB drive. I couldn't go to the reception. Everyone expected me to stand in the church basement with paper plates of casserole and listen to people tell me how sorry they were, how Dad was in a better place now, how Helen must be devastated. But that man's words were still ringing in my ears. Room 7. Behind the altar. 20 minutes. I told my sister Emma I needed air and slipped back into the main chapel while everyone else filed downstairs. The space felt different, empty. Colder. The afternoon light came through the stained glass in strange colors that made everything look like it was underwater. I walked past the front pews where we'd sat during the service, past the flower arrangements that still smelled too sweet, and stopped at the altar. Behind it was a narrow hallway I'd never paid attention to before. Storage, probably. Cleaning supplies and extra chairs. There were 3 doors. The first 2 were unlocked, exactly what I expected. Mops. Boxes of candles. But the third door had a small brass plate that said 7 and a keyhole that matched the key still warm in my hand. My fingers were shaking when I unlocked it. Inside was smaller than I expected.
No windows.
Just metal shelving units filled with old hymnals and a cabinet pushed against the back wall. The cabinet had a combination lock, the kind with 4 rotating numbers. I stood there staring at it, my mind blank. What childhood address? We moved twice before I turned 10. Then I remembered. The yellow house on Maple Street. The one with the tire swing. 2-7-0-9. I dialed the number slowly, afraid I was wrong, afraid I was right. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The USB drive was in a plastic case, the kind you get at office supply stores. Next to it was a stack of papers folded in half, the top one dated 3 weeks ago in Dad's handwriting. Last will and testament. My throat went tight. Below that was an envelope with my name on it, the ink slightly smeared like he'd been crying when he wrote it. I picked up the letter with hands that didn't feel like mine anymore. The paper crinkled as I unfolded it. "Ashley, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I waited so long. I thought I could handle this on my own. I thought I could protect you by keeping you away. I was wrong about so many things, but I wasn't wrong about Helen." Footsteps echoed in the chapel. Helen's voice carried down the hallway, sharp and impatient. "Ashley, are you back here? People are waiting." I shoved everything into my purse, closed the cabinet, and spun the lock. When she appeared in the doorway, I was standing perfectly still, trying to look like someone who belonged there. "What are you doing?" she asked.
"Just needed a minute," I said.
"It's been a long day." She studied me for a moment, her eyes moving from my face to my purse and back again. Then she smiled, the same smile she'd worn all morning.
"Perfect. Practiced."
"Poisonous."
"Come on," she said.
"You shouldn't be alone right now." But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Dad's words in my bag, and I had a feeling everything she'd ever told me was a lie. I didn't make it through the reception. I stayed long enough to avoid questions, long enough to watch Helen play the grieving widow with her hand on her chest and her voice breaking at all the right moments. Then I told Emma I had a migraine and drove straight to my hotel. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my purse the entire drive. I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced Helen was following me, convinced somehow she knew what I'd found. But the parking lot was empty when I pulled in. Just me and the distant sound of highway traffic. In my room, I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to plug in the drive. There was only one file on it. A video, dated 2 weeks before Dad died. I clicked play. The man on the screen looked like my father, but he didn't look like my father. He was thin in a way that seemed wrong, his face hollowed out, his eyes shadowed. He was sitting in what looked like his home office, the one Helen redecorated last year with gray walls and modern furniture. But the door behind him was closed, and he kept glancing at it like he was afraid someone would walk in. "Ashley," he said, and his voice cracked. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And I need you to know the truth before Helen buries it along with me." I pressed pause.
Took a breath.
Press play again. "I should have told you sooner. I should have called you back when you tried to visit last Christmas. But Helen said you were busy, that you didn't want to see me, and I believed her, because it was easier than believing what I was starting to suspect." He coughed, the kind that sounded wet and painful. "She's been isolating me from you and your siblings for 2 years. Deleting your messages. Telling me you called when you didn't. Telling you I didn't want to see you when I did. I didn't figure it out until it was too late." The camera shook slightly. He was holding it himself, propping it up on something. "She's been controlling my medications. Switching pills. I don't know what she's giving me, but I know it's not what the doctor prescribed. And she's been forging my signature on documents. Financial transfers. Power of attorney forms. I found copies hidden in her desk." His eyes moved to the door again. "I don't have much time. She tracks my computer usage now. But I need you to find Marcus Webb. He's a lawyer in Bellingham. I hired him 6 months ago when I started to understand what was happening. He has everything, copies of everything. The evidence. The timeline." He leaned closer to the camera, his face filling the screen. "Everything you need is in the chapel and the bank. Safety deposit box 447 at First National. You're listed as cosigner. I did that years ago. Marcus has the authorization papers." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Ashley, I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I let her do this. But don't let her win. Don't let her erase you and Emma and your brother from my life, like I never had children before her. Promise me." The video cut off. I sat there in the dark hotel room, staring at the frozen image of my father's face, and realized I'd been crying without knowing it. Helen hadn't just stolen his money. She'd stolen his last 2 years. She'd made sure he died alone, thinking his children had abandoned him. And she was about to find out that some things you can't forge. The will reading was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in Helen's attorney's office, a glass tower downtown that made everything feel cold and official. Helen had called each of us personally the day before, her voice syrupy with false concern. "I know this is difficult, but your father would want us to handle this properly. As a family." Emma sat next to me in the waiting room, picking at her cuticles. Our brother Jake was on my other side, checking his phone every 30 seconds like he wanted to be anywhere else. Helen arrived exactly on time, dressed in black with pearls, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread on elegant grief. Her attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vance, ushered us into a conference room with a view of the city. Everything was mahogany and leather. Everything smelled like money and furniture polish. We sat on one side of the table. Helen sat on the other, her hands folded, her expression serene. Patricia didn't waste time. She opened a folder and slid copies of the will across the table to each of us. This is your father's last will and testament, executed 6 months ago and properly witnessed. Mrs. Richardson inherits the house, all financial accounts, and the entirety of the estate. Ashley, Emma, and Jacob each receive $25,000 in recognition of their estrangement from Mr. Richardson during his final years. The word hit me like a slap. Estrangement. That's not true, Emma said, her voice small. We weren't estranged. We called. We visited. He was the one who... I understand this is emotional, Patricia cut in smoothly. But your father was very clear about his wishes. He felt you had chosen to distance yourselves from him and Helen. Helen touched her eyes with a tissue, a perfect performance. I tried to bridge the gap. I really did. But after a while, Daniel stopped trying to reach out. It broke his heart. I stared at the will in front of me. The signature looked like Dad's, but something was off. The loop on the R in Richardson. He always made it bigger. This one was cramped, hesitant. If you have concerns about the validity, Patricia started. We have documentation, Helen interrupted gently. She nodded at Patricia, who produced another folder. Your father tried repeatedly to reconnect. Emails. Text messages. He invited you to Christmas. To his birthday. You never responded. Patricia slid printouts across the table. Emails from Dad's account asking why we never called, saying he missed us, asking if we were ashamed of him now that he'd remarried. Text messages that got progressively more desperate, more hurt. I scanned them quickly, my chest tightening. The dates were right. The email address was right. But the words were wrong. Dad didn't write like this. He didn't use ellipses like that. He never said kinda instead of kind of. He was an English teacher for 30 years. These aren't from him, I said. Helen's expression didn't change. I know denial is part of grief, Ashley. But these are from his phone. His email account. Access you had, I said, looking directly at her. The temperature in the room dropped. Patricia's smile became tight and professional. If you're suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything yet. I stood up, the will still in my hand. But I'd like a copy of the original for independent review. And I'd like to know who the witnesses were. Helen's composure finally cracked, just for a second. Just long enough for me to see the flash of anger before she covered it with concern. Ashley, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Your father wanted us to move forward peacefully. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said. I walked out with Emma and Jake trailing behind me, my heart hammering. Because I knew what Dad's real will said. And it wasn't this. I found Marcus Webb's number on a business card tucked into the envelope with Dad's letter. The card was plain white with black text, no logo, no tagline. Just a name and a phone number. When I called, he answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting. Ashley Richardson? His voice was calm, measured. The voice of someone who'd been expecting bad news. The man at the funeral, I said. That was you. It was. I'm sorry for the theatrics, but I couldn't risk Helen seeing us together. There was a pause, the sound of traffic in the background. Your father gave me specific instructions. If anything happened to him, I was to get you that key and nothing else.
No explanations.
He said you'd figure out the rest. I found the video. Good. Then you know what we're dealing with. Another pause. We need to meet. Somewhere Helen won't think to look. There's a coffee shop called The Grind in Fairhaven, about 40 minutes north. Can you be there tomorrow morning? 8 o'clock. I wrote down the address. How long were you working with him? Almost a year. I'll explain everything when I see you. And Ashley? His voice softened slightly. Don't tell anyone you're meeting me. Not your siblings. Not anyone. Helen has resources, and she's been planning this for a long time. The grind was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, a chalkboard menu with more coffee options than seemed necessary. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. He looked exactly like he had at the funeral. Mid-40s, gray at the temples, the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too many bad situations. He stood when I approached, shook my hand with a firm grip. Thank you for coming. I slid into the booth across from him. Tell me what's going on. He pulled a slim folder from his briefcase and set it on the table between us. Your father came to me last February. He'd discovered Helen was having an affair. He'd found text messages on a burner phone she'd hidden in the garage. But when he started digging deeper, he found something worse. Financial records that didn't match up. Bank statements for accounts he didn't remember opening. Transfers to shell companies he'd never heard of. She was stealing from him, systematically. For at least 3 years, probably longer. She'd forged his signature on power of attorney documents, made herself joint owner on accounts, established herself as his healthcare proxy. Marcus opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of bank statements with highlighted sections showing withdrawals in increments just small enough not to trigger alerts. Your father estimated she'd moved close to $400,000 out of his accounts. My stomach dropped. Why didn't he go to the police? He wanted to, but he was afraid. Helen had positioned herself perfectly. She was his wife, his caregiver. She controlled access to his doctors, his medications. He was terrified that if he moved against her before he had ironclad evidence, she'd have him declared incompetent. Marcus met my eyes.
He wasn't paranoid, Ashley.
He was right to be afraid. 2 months after he hired me, his health started deteriorating rapidly. The medications, I said, remembering the video. We suspected, but couldn't prove it. By the time he was sick enough that I could have pushed for an investigation, he made me promise not to. He said it would only put you and your siblings in danger. Marcus slid another document across the table. This is the real will. Executed properly with independent witnesses, I provided. It leaves everything to you 3, split equally. Helen gets nothing except the legal minimum as a surviving spouse. I stared at the signature. The R in Richardson with its characteristic large loop. I need your help, Marcus said. Your father set up a safety deposit box at First National. You're listed as co-signer. Authorization filed separately so Helen wouldn't know. He put everything in there. Copies of the forged documents. The evidence of the affair. A detailed timeline. But I can't access it without you. When? I asked. Today if possible. Before Helen realizes you're not going to just accept her version of events. He leaned forward. She's going to come at you hard, Ashley. She's going to threaten you, try to discredit you, maybe worse. Are you ready for that? I thought about the video, about Dad's face, gaunt and desperate, apologizing for not being stronger. She already started, I said. Let's go get the evidence. First National Bank sat on a corner downtown, all granite columns and brass fixtures, the kind of building designed to make you feel like your money was safe because everything looked expensive and permanent. Marcus parked in the garage across the street and we walked over together, not talking, both of us scanning the sidewalk like Helen might materialize out of nowhere. Inside, the air conditioning was aggressive and the marble floors echoed with every footstep. Marcus approached the counter and asked for someone who could help with safety deposit box access. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain led us to a private room in the back, past the teller windows and through a heavy door that required a keycard. Box number? She asked. 447, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She checked her computer, then looked at me over her glasses. I'll need identification and the key. I slid my driver's license across the desk. The key was in my pocket, warm from being held too tight. She compared my face to the license, typed something, then nodded and stood. Follow me. The vault was exactly what you'd imagine. Steel walls, numbered boxes in neat rows, fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly unreal. She used her key and mine to open box 447, slid out the metal container, and handed it to me. Take your time. There's a private viewing room through that door. Just let me know when you're finished. The viewing room was barely bigger than a closet. A small table, 2 chairs, no windows. Marcus closed the door behind us, and I set the box down carefully, like it might explode. My hands were shaking again. Ready? Marcus asked. I lifted the lid. The box was packed tight with documents, everything organized in labeled folders. The first folder was marked Forged Signatures, in Dad's neat handwriting. Inside were photocopies of bank documents, power of attorney forms, real estate papers, all with signatures that looked like his but weren't quite right. Someone had used a highlighter to mark the differences. The loop on the R, the angle of the D, small things you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. The second folder was labeled Financial Records. Bank statements going back 3 years showing regular transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Withdrawals of $9,000, just under the reporting threshold, made every few weeks like clockwork. Deposits to something called Clearwater Holdings LLC, a company that didn't exist according to the business registration search Dad had printed out and included. Marcus was photographing everything with his phone, working methodically through each page. This is solid, he muttered. This is really solid. The third folder made my breath catch. Timeline of isolation. Dad had documented everything. Dates when he'd tried to call me, and Helen said I was busy. Messages he'd sent that I never received. Visits he'd planned that Helen canceled, telling him I'd called to postpone. He'd even noted the changes in his medication, listing the pills by color and shape with question marks next to ones he didn't recognize. But it was the fourth folder that made everything real. Photographs. Helen with a man I didn't recognize, his arm around her waist. Helen and the same man outside a restaurant kissing. Helen and the man in what looked like a hotel room, the timestamp showing a date from last summer. The date Dad had been hospitalized for pneumonia. The date Helen told us we shouldn't visit because he needed rest and quiet. There were text message screenshots, too, printed from the burner phone. He doesn't suspect anything. Just a few more months, and we're clear. Once the new will is filed, everything transfers automatically. I set the photos down, my hands numb.
She planned this.
All of it. Marcus had stopped photographing. He was staring at the timeline, his jaw tight. Your father was meticulous. This is more than I expected. We have everything we need for a fraud case. Possibly elder abuse. Definitely forgery. He looked at me. But you need to understand what this means. We're not just contesting a will. We're accusing her of crimes. She'll fight back. I don't care, I said, and I meant it. She isolated him. She poisoned him. She made him die thinking his children didn't love him. Then we move fast. Before she knows what's coming. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm going to call a forensic accountant I trust. We'll need expert analysis of these financial records. And we should file an emergency motion to freeze the estate assets before she can transfer anything else. I gathered the folders carefully, my mind already racing ahead. Helen thought she'd won. She thought she'd covered her tracks perfectly, that Dad had died with all her secrets buried. But he'd left me a roadmap, and I was going to follow it all the way to the truth. At this point, Helen has no idea that everything she's built is about to collapse. But she's not going down without a fight. What happens next is the kind of psychological warfare that shows you exactly what someone's capable of when they're cornered. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. You don't want to miss how this woman tries to destroy Ashley one last time before the truth comes out. They showed up at my hotel room at 7 in the morning, 2 days after the bank vault. I'd just gotten out of the shower when someone knocked, hard and insistent. Through the peephole, I saw Helen standing in the hallway with Patricia Vance, both of them dressed like they were heading to court. Helen had her arms crossed. Patricia was holding a briefcase. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. "How did you know where I was staying?" "Your sister told me," Helen said, her voice sharp in a way she'd never let slip at the funeral. "The performance was over. We need to talk." "We don't have anything to talk about." Patricia stepped forward, all business. "Ms. Richardson, this can go one of two ways. The easy way, or the expensive way. We're offering you the easy way." "I'm not signing anything. You haven't even seen what we're offering." Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a document, multiple pages stapled together. "A settlement agreement. You and your siblings each receive $50,000, up from the $25,000 in the will. Mrs. Richardson retains the house and primary assets. In exchange, you agree not to contest the will or make any claims against the estate." "That's generous," Helen added, though her eyes were cold. "Considering." "Considering what?" Helen's smile was razor-thin. "Considering your father's declining mental state in his final year. Considering how inappropriate it would be to drag his memory through court proceedings that would expose his deterioration. Dementia is such an ugly thing, Ashley. Do you really want everyone to know how confused he was at the end? How paranoid?" My pulse spiked. He wasn't paranoid. He thought I was poisoning him. Helen's voice dropped to something almost pitying. He thought I was stealing from him. He made wild accusations to anyone who would listen. His doctor had started discussing memory care facilities. That's a lie. I have medical records that say otherwise. Patricia pulled another document from the briefcase. Dr. Morrison's notes from his last 6 appointments, documenting confusion, memory loss, accusations against Mrs. Richardson that had no basis in reality. She held it up, but didn't hand it over. "This becomes public if you contest the will." "And there's more," Helen said, taking a step closer. "Your father told me things, Ashley.
About you.
About how you'd been asking him for money constantly over the past few years. How you'd manipulated him into giving you access to his accounts. How worried he was that you were taking advantage of him." The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. "I never asked him for money. Not once. That's not what his bank records will show." Helen's expression was perfectly calm. "Transfers to your account going back 3 years. Tens of thousands of dollars. All documented. All traceable." My throat went tight. She'd forged those too. She'd built a case against me while stealing from him. "If you force us to defend this estate in court," Patricia said, "all of this comes out. Your father's mental decline. Your financial exploitation of a vulnerable elderly man. It won't just be ugly, Ms. Richardson. It could be criminal." "We're trying to protect you," Helen added, her voice sickeningly sweet now. "Your father wouldn't want you to destroy yourself trying to fight reality. Take the settlement. Walk away. Remember him the way he was before he got sick." I looked at both of them standing in my hotel hallway, so confident they had me cornered. Helen thought she'd thought of everything. She'd built a perfect trap. "Get out," I said quietly. Patricia's expression hardened. "This offer expires in 48 hours. I don't care if it expires in 48 minutes. I'm not signing." I started to close the door. Helen put her hand on it, stopping me. For just a second, the mask dropped completely, and I saw real rage underneath. "You're making a mistake. I gave you a chance to do this with dignity." "So did my father," I said. "And you killed him for it." I slammed the door in her face and turned the deadbolt, my whole body shaking. I could hear them in the hallway, Patricia's voice sharp with anger, Helen's measured response. Then footsteps. Then silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and called Marcus. He answered immediately. "She knows," I said. "She knows I'm not backing down." And she's coming after me. Good, Marcus said. Let her come. We filed a motion today. Emma called me that afternoon, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify.
Guilt, maybe.
Or fear. Can you come over? I need to show you something. She was staying at Jake's apartment across town, the two of them having decided they didn't want to be alone after the funeral. When I arrived, Jake was at work and Emma was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hands, staring at the screen like it had betrayed her. What's wrong? I asked, sitting down next to her. She didn't look at me. I've been going through my messages. From Dad. And I think something's really wrong, Ash. My stomach dropped. Show me. She handed me the phone, already pulled up to a text conversation from last summer. Messages from Dad's number, casual at first. How's work treating you? Missing you, sweetheart. Normal dad stuff. Then about 3 weeks in, the tone shifted. Do you remember Mom's maiden name? I'm filling out some family history stuff, and my memory's not what it used to be. Emma had responded. Morrison. Are you okay? Of course. Just getting old. Hey, what was our address when you were in elementary school? Trying to remember for the form. 2709 Maple Street. Dad, seriously, are you feeling all right? The questions kept coming, spaced out over weeks. What was the name of the street where we lived in Chicago? What year did we move? What was the name of Emma's first pet? Mom's birthday? The hospital where Emma was born? I thought he was just being nostalgic, Emma whispered. I thought maybe he was making a scrapbook or something for Helen. I answered all of them. I scrolled further. The messages got more specific. Bank names. Account numbers phrased as, do you remember which bank we used when you were little? Password hints disguised as memory games. Every single security question you'd need to access someone's financial accounts, laid out like a treasure map. This wasn't Dad. I said, my voice hollow.
What?
These messages.
Dad didn't send them.
I looked at her, saw the confusion and dawning horror on her face. Helen did. She had access to his phone. She was mining information. Emma's face went white. Oh my God. I gave her everything. I gave her Mom's maiden name, our old addresses, everything she'd need to. To forge documents, I finished. To access accounts. To answer security questions pretending to be him. But why would she need that? She was married to him. She had access to everything. Not to everything. Not to accounts that were set up before they got married. Not to things he'd protected. I pulled out my own phone, scrolling through my message history with Dad. Did she text you asking about me? About what I did for work, where I banked? Emma nodded miserably. Last fall. She asked about your job, your salary, whether you ever talked about money problems. I thought, God, Ash, I thought he was worried about you. I told her you were doing fine, that you'd gotten a raise, that you never asked him for money. She was building a narrative. I said, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. She was documenting that we were financially stable, so it would look suspicious if suddenly there were transfers from his accounts to ours. There weren't transfers, though, right? I met her eyes. She forged them, and she used information you gave her to make it look legitimate. Emma put her head in her hands. I helped her. I gave her everything she needed to steal from him, and I didn't even know it. You didn't know, I said firmly. That's the point. She manipulated you. She manipulated all of us. I took screenshots of the messages, sent them to Marcus. But this proves it, Em. This proves she was systematically gathering information to commit fraud. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Marcus, this is huge. Can Emma testify to this? I looked at my sister, still sitting with her head in her hands, shoulders shaking.
Emma.
I need you to be strong now. Can you tell Marcus about these messages? Can you testify if it comes to that? She lifted her head, her eyes red but determined. She used me to hurt Dad. She used me to help her steal from him. Her jaw set.
Yeah.
I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shake against me. Helen had been so careful, so methodical. But she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated how much we loved our father. And she'd underestimated how far we'd go to get justice for him. "We're going to bury her," I whispered into Emma's hair. "We're going to use everything she did, and we're going to bury her with it." Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes.
Good.
"When do we start?" "We already did," I said. "And we're not stopping until she's in handcuffs." The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in probate court, a building that smelled like old carpet and recycled air. Helen had filed the emergency motion herself, claiming she needed to protect the estate from frivolous challenges by estranged children seeking to exploit their father's death. Patricia Vance had argued that without immediate action, the estate would be drained by legal fees and family conflict. What Helen didn't know was that we'd spent the past week building a case that would blow her perfect widow act apart. Marcus met me outside the courtroom with a leather portfolio under his arm and the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from him. "Ready?"
Let's end this, I said.
Emma and Jake were already inside, sitting in the gallery behind our table. Helen sat across the aisle with Patricia, dressed in black again, her posture perfect, her expression appropriately solemn. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed just slightly. She thought she was walking into a victory lap. Judge Catherine Morrison took the bench at exactly 9 o'clock, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses that she peered over when she addressed the room. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the estate of Daniel Richardson. Mrs. Richardson, you filed this motion. Please state your concerns." Patricia stood, smooth and confident. "Your Honor, Mrs. Richardson is the lawful widow and sole beneficiary of the estate. However, the decedent's adult children from a previous marriage have indicated their intent to contest his clearly expressed wishes. We're asking the court to affirm the validity of Mr. Richardson's will and prevent any further harassment of the grieving widow." "Ms. Richardson?" Judge Morrison looked at me. "You're contesting the will?" Marcus stood. "We are, Your Honor. And we have evidence that the will Mrs. Richardson submitted is a forgery." The temperature in the room dropped. Patricia's expression flickered. Helen's didn't change at all, but her hands tightened on the table in front of her. "That's a serious accusation," Judge Morrison said. "We have serious evidence." Marcus opened his portfolio. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit into evidence the original will, properly executed and witnessed, found in Mr. Richardson's personal effects. We also have a video confession recorded by Mr. Richardson 2 weeks before his death, describing systematic financial fraud and forgery committed by his wife." Patricia shot to her feet. "Objection. We have no proof of authenticity for any of these alleged documents. This is a transparent attempt to—" "We have the forensic analysis," Marcus interrupted calmly. He handed a document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Comparison of the signatures on both wills. The one submitted by Mrs. Richardson shows clear signs of forgery. Different pen pressure, inconsistent letter formation, evidence of tracing. Judge Morrison studied the document, her expression unreadable. "You're saying Mrs. Richardson forged her husband's signature?" "We're saying someone did. We're also saying Mr. Richardson documented extensive financial fraud before his death." Marcus gestured to me. "If the court will allow, we'd like to play the video." Helen finally moved. She leaned over and whispered something sharp to Patricia, whose face had gone pale. Patricia stood again. "Your Honor, even if such a video exists, it's highly prejudicial. Mr. Richardson was suffering from dementia in his final months. His doctor will testify." "We have the medical records," Marcus said. "The real ones. Not the altered versions Mrs. Richardson has been circulating. Mr. Richardson was of sound mind when he executed his will and recorded his statement." Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked directly at Helen. "Mrs. Richardson, did you or did you not have knowledge of a prior will?" For the first time, Helen's composure cracked. Just for a second, just long enough for everyone in the room to see the calculation behind her eyes. My husband changed his mind many times in his final year. He was confused. The children had been pressuring him. "Play the video," Judge Morrison said. Marcus had it ready on a laptop connected to the courtroom's display screen. The image flickered to life. Dad's face, gaunt and desperate, filled the screen. His voice echoed in the silent courtroom. "Ashley, if you're watching this, I'm gone. And I need you to know the truth before Helen buries it along with me." I watched Helen's face as Dad described the isolation, the forged documents, the stolen money. I watched her perfect mask fracture as he detailed the affair, the burner phone, the text messages planning how to take everything once he was dead. Patricia was frantically whispering to her, but Helen wasn't listening. She was staring at the screen like she was watching a ghost. When the video ended, the silence was absolute. Judge Morrison put her glasses back on. "Bailiff, please contact the district attorney's office. I'm ordering an immediate criminal investigation into potential fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." She looked at Helen, her expression hard. "All estate assets are frozen effective immediately. Mrs. Richardson, you are not to access any accounts, sell any property, or dispose of any assets pending investigation. Do you understand?" Helen didn't answer. She was still staring at the blank screen where Dad's face had been. "Mrs. Richardson," Judge Morrison repeated. "Yes," Helen whispered finally. "I understand. We're adjourned. Mr. Webb, please provide all evidence to the DA's office by end of business today." The gavel came down like a gunshot. 3 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby watching news cameras surround Helen as she was let out in handcuffs. The charges had come down the week before: 17 counts of fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and identity theft. The district attorney said it was one of the most systematic cases of elder abuse they'd seen. Helen's bail was set at $500,000. Her boyfriend, the man from the photographs, had already taken a plea deal and was testifying against her. Emma stood next to me, her arm linked through mine. Jake was on my other side, quiet but present in the way he always was. We didn't say anything as Helen passed, her eyes straight ahead, her perfect composure finally and completely shattered. Patricia Vance had dropped her as a client 2 days after the hearing. Helen was facing 20 years. "You okay?" Emma asked quietly. I nodded. I was more than okay. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I could breathe. The estate had been settled according to Dad's real will. The house, the accounts, everything split 3 ways just like he wanted. It was more money than I'd expected, more than I needed. But it wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. A week after the settlement was finalized, I sat in Marcus Webb's office with a proposal. He listened, asked questions, took notes in his careful way. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Your father would be proud," he said. The Richardson Family Legal Fund launched 2 months later, a nonprofit dedicated to helping families fight inheritance fraud and elder financial abuse. We covered legal fees for people who couldn't afford to fight back against predators like Helen. We provided resources, connected people with forensic accountants and ethical attorneys, funded investigations. Emma managed the day-to-day operations. Jake handled the finances. I became the face of it, telling Dad's story over and over to anyone who would listen. We held the launch event at a community center downtown. Local news covered it. People came forward with their own stories, their own battles against family members who'd stolen from aging parents, forged documents, isolated vulnerable people to take everything they had. It was heartbreaking and infuriating and necessary. That night, after everyone had left, I drove to the cemetery. Dad's headstone was simple, just his name and dates and a line from his favorite poem, "The truth will set you free." Helen had chosen it, probably thinking it was poetically ironic. She had no idea how right she was. I sat on the grass next to the marker, the way I used to sit in his office when I was a kid, and he was grading papers. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the headstones. "I get it now," I said to the quiet air. "What you were trying to teach me." Dad had spent his whole life as a teacher, trying to instill lessons that would last beyond the classroom. His final lesson was the hardest, that truth matters more than peace. That justice is worth fighting for even when it costs you everything. That sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you have to stand up against. He could have just left us the money. He could have exposed Helen before he died and handled it himself. But he didn't. He left us the tools and the choice. He made us fight for it because he knew that was the only way we'd truly understand what he was trying to say. Love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's teaching someone to be strong when you're not there anymore. Sometimes it's leaving them a locked room and a video confession and trusting them to do the right thing even when it's hard. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "First family contacted us today. Single mom fighting her brother over their dad's estate. We're taking the case." I stood up, brushed the grass off my jeans, and took one last look at the headstone. "The truth will set you free." Helen thought she could bury the truth with Dad. She thought she was clever enough to rewrite reality. But Dad had taught English for 30 years. He knew better than anyone that some stories refuse to be rewritten. That truth has a way of surviving even when it's hidden. That the best legacy isn't money or property or a perfectly maintained facade. It's teaching the people you love to fight for what's right, especially when it costs everything. "Thanks, Dad," I said quietly. "I promise I won't waste it." The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. I walked back to my car, pulled out my phone, and called the number Emma had sent. "Hello? This is Ashley Richardson with the Richardson Family Legal Fund. I understand you need help. Tell me everything." And the work continued. This story started with a funeral and ended with a family that refused to let lies become truth. But here's what matters. You're part of this now. By watching, by caring, by sharing stories like Ashley's, you're saying that truth matters. That families like hers matter. Leave a comment telling me what this story meant to you. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. Because every story we share is another voice that refuses to stay silent.